Water seems simple. You drink it every day. You cook with it. Your body is made of it. But here's something most people don't realize. Water is one of the strangest substances in the entire universe. In fact, from a physics perspective, water behaves in ways that almost break the rules. Let me give you a simple example. Almost every substance in the world behaves the same way when it freezes. When metals freeze, they become denser. When wax freezes, it becomes denser. When molten rock cools into solid stone, it becomes denser. That's what physics predicts should happen, but water refuses to follow that rule. When water freezes, it expands. Ice becomes less dense than liquid water, which is why ice floats. Now that might seem like a trivial curiosity, but if water behaved like every other liquid on Earth, lakes would freeze from the bottom up. Oceans would gradually freeze solid. Most aquatic life would not exist. In other words, life on Earth depends on water breaking the normal rules of physics. And it doesn't stop there. Water also has unusually high heat capacity, unusually strong molecular bonds, strange density behavior around 4 degrees Celsius, and evidence suggests it may even behave like two different liquids at once under certain conditions. So the real question becomes, why? Why does such a simple molecule, just 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, behave so differently from nearly every other liquid in nature? Here's what's really going on. Water molecules form something called hydrogen bonds. Think of them like tiny magnetic connections between molecules. These bonds constantly form, break, and reform, and this creates a kind of dynamic molecular network that behaves in ways scientists are still studying today. But here's where this becomes truly fascinating for human health. The same strange properties that make water unusual in physics are also what allow water to support life, metabolism, temperature regulation, and cellular chemistry inside your body. In other words, your metabolism, your brain function, your energy levels, even how your cells burn fat, depend on these strange behaviors of water. So today, I want to walk you through something fascinating. We're going to explore 6 surprising ways water breaks the rules of physics, and more importantly, what those properties mean for your body, your metabolism, and your health. Because once you understand how water actually behaves, you'll start to see hydration, metabolism, and cellular health in a completely different way. And if this kind of clear, science-driven explanation is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post videos like this regularly to help people understand how their bodies actually work. Now, let's start with the first strange rule water breaks. And it's one of the most important. Water expands when it freezes, which, according to normal physics, shouldn't happen at all. Before we dive deeper, let's quickly map out the 6 strange rules water breaks and why they matter. Because when you see these patterns together, you begin to understand something remarkable. Water isn't just a liquid we drink. It's the foundation of biological chemistry, including everything from cellular energy production to brain function and metabolic health. So here are the 6 insights we're going to explore. Insight number 1. Water expands when it freezes, instead of contracting like most substances. This strange property is why ice floats, why lakes freeze from the top down, and why life in oceans and lakes can survive winter. But this behavior also reveals something deeper about water's molecular structure, and that structure plays a role in how fluids behave inside the body. Insight number 2. Water has an extremely high heat capacity. In simple terms, water can absorb a huge amount of heat without dramatically changing temperature. This is one of the reasons your body can maintain a stable temperature around 37 degrees Celsius, even when the environment changes. Without this property, your metabolism and enzymes simply wouldn't function properly. Insight number 3. Water molecules stick to each other through something called hydrogen bonding. This creates unusual properties like surface tension, capillary action, and the ability of water to move through tiny biological structures, including blood vessels and cellular membranes. These forces help water move nutrients, hormones, and oxygen throughout the body. Insight number 4. Water reaches its maximum density at about 4 degrees Celsius. That means water actually becomes slightly lighter as it cools further toward freezing. This bizarre density behavior helps stabilize aquatic ecosystems, but it also demonstrates how water organizes itself in constantly shifting molecular structures. Insight number 5. Under certain conditions, water may behave as if it exists in 2 different liquid states at once. This phenomenon, sometimes called liquid polymorphism, is still being studied, but it helps scientists understand why water behaves differently under pressure, temperature shifts, and inside biological systems. Insight number 6. Water is one of the most powerful universal solvents in nature. It dissolves minerals, nutrients, electrolytes, hormones, and metabolic waste, making it essential for cellular detoxification, digestion, and energy production. Without this property, metabolism would simply stop. Now here's why all of this matters. These six strange properties allow water to do something almost no other molecule can do. It can stabilize life, it regulates temperature, it transports nutrients, it protects cells, it enables chemical reactions. In other words, water doesn't just support life, it makes life possible. So in the next section, we'll explore the first rule water breaks, the one that confuses physics students all over the world. Why water expands when it freezes. And once you understand that simple phenomenon, you'll start to see how extraordinary this everyday molecule really is. Let's start with one of the most famous ways water breaks the rules of physics. Water expands when it freezes. Now at first glance, that might sound like a small detail, but in physics it's incredibly unusual. Almost every substance in the world does the opposite. When liquids freeze, their molecules slow down and pack closer together, making the solid form denser than the liquid. That's why solid metal sinks in molten metal. It's why cooled wax contracts. But water behaves differently. When water freezes, the molecules actually spread farther apart, forming a crystal structure that takes up more space. Let me explain this with a simple whiteboard analogy. Imagine a group of people standing randomly in a crowded room. They're moving around, shifting positions, bumping into each other. That's liquid water. Now imagine those same people suddenly holding hands in a perfectly organized hexagonal pattern. The structure becomes more rigid, but it also takes up more space. That's ice. The reason this happens is because of hydrogen bonds. Each water molecule has a slightly positive side and a slightly negative side. This causes neighboring molecules to attract each other and form temporary connections. When water freezes, these hydrogen bonds lock into a hexagonal lattice structure. That lattice contains empty space, which makes ice less dense than liquid water. And that's why ice floats. Now here's why this matters for life. If ice were denser than water, it would sink. Every winter, lakes and oceans would freeze from the bottom upward instead of the surface downward. Over time, entire bodies of water would turn solid. Aquatic ecosystems would collapse. Many forms of life simply could not survive. So this strange physical behavior, this rule-breaking property, actually protects life on Earth. But it also teaches us something important about water inside the human body. Your body is roughly 60% water. Every cell, every enzyme, every metabolic reaction occurs in a watery environment, and the same hydrogen bonding network that forms ice crystals is also constantly forming and breaking inside your cells. That network helps maintain the structure of proteins, supports nutrient transport, and stabilizes the chemical reactions that produce energy in your mitochondria. In other words, water isn't just a passive liquid inside your body, it's an active structural participant in metabolism. And when hydration levels drop even slightly, these molecular networks become less efficient. Enzymes slow down, cellular communication becomes weaker, energy production can decline. So understanding water's strange physics isn't just interesting science, it's a reminder that something as simple as proper hydration directly affects how efficiently your body functions. If this explanation is helping you see everyday science in a new way, consider subscribing. I post content like this regularly to help you understand the deeper mechanisms behind health and the human body. Now the next rule, water breaks, might be even more surprising, because water can absorb enormous amounts of heat without changing temperature very much at all, and that property is one of the main reasons your body can survive and regulate temperature in a constantly changing environment. Now let's explore the second rule. Water seems to break. Water has an extraordinarily high heat capacity. That might sound like technical language, but the idea is actually simple. Heat capacity describes how much energy a substance can absorb before its temperature changes. Most liquids heat up quickly. Leave a metal spoon in hot tea and it becomes hot almost immediately. Put a rock in the sun and it heats rapidly. But water behaves very differently. Water can absorb large amounts of heat energy, while its temperature changes only slightly. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine heat energy like people entering a room. In most substances, those people quickly start moving faster, which means the temperature rises quickly. But in water, a large portion of that incoming energy is used to break and reform hydrogen bonds between molecules. So instead of immediately increasing temperature, the energy gets temporarily stored inside the molecular network. In other words, water acts like a thermal buffer. It absorbs energy, distributes it, and releases it slowly. Now here's why this matters. This single property stabilizes the entire climate of Earth. Oceans absorb heat during the day and during summer months, then slowly release it at night and during winter. Without that buffering effect, temperatures on Earth would swing wildly, but the same principle is happening inside your body every second. Your body operates best at around 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Your enzymes, hormones, and metabolic reactions are finely tuned to this temperature range. If your internal temperature fluctuated dramatically, those chemical reactions would become unstable. Proteins would lose their structure, enzymes would stop functioning properly, but because your body is largely composed of water, it has a built-in temperature stabilization system. Blood plasma, cellular fluid, and lymphatic fluid all contain water that absorbs metabolic heat and distributes it throughout the body. This is especially important during exercise, stress, and metabolic activity, when cells produce large amounts of heat. Water helps absorb that heat and prevent overheating. This is also why dehydration can make people feel tired, dizzy, or mentally foggy. When water levels drop, the body loses part of its thermal buffering capacity. Even small temperature shifts can start to affect cellular efficiency, and research consistently shows that even mild dehydration, around 1–2% loss of body water, can impair cognitive performance, focus, and energy levels. So something as simple as hydration directly influences your brain, metabolism, and physical performance. Water is acting like a biological cooling system. It stabilizes the environment where all your metabolic reactions occur. And this brings us to the next strange property of water. Water molecules don't just exist independently. They form an incredibly dynamic network where molecules constantly stick to each other and organize themselves. These tiny attractions create forces strong enough to move water through plants, through blood vessels, and even through microscopic spaces inside your cells. And understanding that phenomenon reveals another surprising way water bends the rules of physics. Now we arrive at one of the most important and most fascinating properties of water. Water molecules stick to each other. This phenomenon is called hydrogen bonding, and it creates an invisible molecular network that gives water many of its unusual behaviors. Here's what's really going on inside a water molecule. A water molecule has one oxygen atom and two hydrogen atoms, H2O. But the electrons inside that molecule are not evenly distributed. Oxygen pulls electrons toward itself more strongly than hydrogen does. This creates a small electrical imbalance. The oxygen side becomes slightly negative. The hydrogen side becomes slightly positive. Now imagine millions of these tiny magnets floating next to each other. The positive side of one molecule is attracted to the negative side of another. These attractions are called hydrogen bonds. They're not as strong as true chemical bonds, but they're strong enough to create a constantly shifting web where molecules attach, detach, and reattach again. And this network is what gives water some remarkable physical powers. For example, it creates surface tension, the reason water droplets form beads instead of spreading flat. It also creates capillary action, which allows water to move through extremely narrow spaces. Let me explain that with a simple analogy. Imagine dipping the corner of a paper towel into a glass of water. The water slowly climbs upward through the towel. Gravity is pulling down, yet the water moves upward anyway. This happens because water molecules are pulling each other along while also sticking to the fibers of the towel. Now scale that idea up to biology. Inside plants, this same property pulls water from the roots all the way to the top of tall trees, sometimes over 100 feet high, without a pump. And inside your body, the same physics helps move water through tiny blood vessels and cellular spaces. This molecular cohesion helps transport oxygen, nutrients, electrolytes, hormones, metabolic waste. Your circulation system depends on the fluid properties created by hydrogen bonding. But here's where it becomes especially important for health. Because water doesn't just move substances around, it also helps maintain the shape and stability of proteins and enzymes, the tiny biological machines that run your metabolism. Proteins fold into very specific shapes, and water molecules help stabilize those shapes through interactions with charged regions on the protein surface. If hydration levels drop too low, these molecular environments can change. Enzyme reactions become slower. Cellular communication becomes less efficient. Energy production in mitochondria can decline. So hydration isn't just about preventing thirst. It's about maintaining the chemical environment where metabolism operates. This is why even mild dehydration can lead to fatigue, headaches, reduced concentration, and decreased physical performance. Your cellular chemistry literally depends on water's molecular network. If this breakdown is helping you understand the science behind everyday health, consider subscribing. I share content like this regularly to help people understand the deeper mechanisms behind metabolism, energy, and longevity. Now, the next rule: water breaks might surprise you even more, because water actually becomes most dense at 4 degrees Celsius, not when it freezes, and that strange density behavior plays a critical role in the stability of ecosystems and reveals even more about water's mysterious molecular structure. Now let's explore another strange rule: water breaks. Water reaches its maximum density at about 4 degrees Celsius, not when it freezes, not when it's extremely cold, but specifically at 4 degrees Celsius. From a physics perspective, this is incredibly unusual. Most liquids become steadily denser and denser as they cool. The colder they get, the tighter the molecules pack together, but water refuses to behave that way. Here's what actually happens. As water cools from room temperature, the molecules move more slowly and begin packing closer together, which increases density, just like normal liquids. But when water reaches around 4 degrees Celsius, something surprising begins to happen. The hydrogen bonding network we discussed earlier starts organizing the molecules into more structured arrangements. Those structures begin forming tiny open spaces between molecules. So instead of continuing to compress, the liquid actually starts expanding slightly as it approaches freezing. By the time water turns into ice, the expansion becomes dramatic enough for ice to float. Let me explain this with a simple mental picture. Imagine stacking oranges in a box. If you shake the box, the oranges settle closer together. That's like warmer water. But if the oranges suddenly lock into a rigid geometric structure, small gaps appear between them. That's what happens to water molecules as they approach freezing. Now here's why this strange property is incredibly important for life. Because it allows lakes and oceans to stratify in winter. When air temperature drops, surface water cools first. As it cools to 4 degrees Celsius, it becomes denser and sinks toward the bottom. But when the surface water cools further toward freezing, it becomes less dense, so it stays at the top. Eventually, ice forms only on the surface. This layer of ice then acts like an insulating blanket, protecting the liquid water underneath. That means fish, microorganisms, and entire aquatic ecosystems can survive winter beneath the ice. Without this strange density behavior, lakes would freeze solid from the bottom up. Life in cold climates would be almost impossible. But this phenomenon also reveals something deeper about water. It shows that water molecules are constantly balancing between order and movement. Sometimes they behave like a fluid. Sometimes they begin forming temporary structured networks. And these shifting structures influence how water behaves in biological systems, including inside your cells. Because inside the body, water isn't just sitting still. It's interacting with proteins, electrolytes, membranes, and enzymes, constantly reorganizing its molecular network. And these interactions affect everything from cell hydration to nutrient transport to metabolic efficiency. In other words, water's strange density behavior isn't just a curiosity of physics. It's another reminder that water is a dynamic biological medium, one that constantly adapts to support life. Now, the next property of water is even more mysterious. Some researchers believe water may actually behave as if it has two different liquid forms under certain conditions, a phenomenon scientists are still trying to fully understand. And if that's true, it would make water even more extraordinary than we already thought. Now we come to one of the most mysterious discoveries about water, something scientists are still actively studying. Under certain conditions, water may behave as if it exists in two different liquid states at the same time. This idea is called liquid polymorphism. At first, it sounds almost impossible. After all, we're used to thinking about three states of matter: solid, liquid, and gas, ice, water, and vapor. But research in molecular physics suggests that water might have two distinct liquid structures, one that is high density and another that is low density. Here's what's really going on inside the molecular network. Remember the hydrogen bonds we discussed earlier? Water molecules are constantly forming and breaking these connections. Most of the time, this network is chaotic, molecules shifting and rearranging every trillionth of a second. But under certain temperature and pressure conditions, simulations and experiments suggest the molecules can organize into two competing structural patterns. One structure is more tightly packed, meaning higher density. The other forms a more open hydrogen bond network, meaning lower density. Think of it like a crowd at a concert. Sometimes people are packed tightly shoulder to shoulder. Other times they spread out with more space between them. The same people, two different arrangements. Water molecules can do something similar. Some research from institutions like Princeton University and other molecular physics labs has shown that these two structural forms may rapidly switch back and forth, especially in supercooled water. This could help explain many of water's strange properties, including its unusual density behavior and thermal characteristics. Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with biology? Here's the interesting part. Inside living cells, water is not just a bulk liquid sitting in a container. It's interacting constantly with proteins, cell membranes, minerals, electrolytes, DNA, enzymes. These surfaces influence how water molecules organize themselves. In fact, near biological surfaces, water molecules often form structured layers, slightly different from normal liquid water. These layers can affect how molecules move, how nutrients dissolve, and how biochemical reactions occur. In simple terms, water inside your body may not behave exactly like the water in a glass. It's part of a dynamic biochemical environment. This is one reason hydration quality matters, not just hydration quantity. Electrolytes, minerals, and cellular health all influence how water functions inside tissues. And when cellular environments are disrupted through dehydration, inflammation, or metabolic stress, the structure and movement of water inside cells can change as well. So while scientists are still exploring this phenomenon, it highlights something important. Water is far more complex than we once believed. And the better we understand its behavior, the better we understand how life itself functions at the molecular level. Now there's one final property of water we need to talk about, and it might be the most important of all for human biology. Water is one of the most powerful solvents in nature, meaning it can dissolve and transport an enormous variety of substances, from minerals and nutrients to hormones and metabolic waste. Without this ability, metabolism simply couldn't happen. Now we come to the final property, and arguably the most important one for human biology. Water is often called the universal solvent. What that means is simple. Water can dissolve more substances than almost any other liquid on Earth. And this single property is what allows metabolism to exist. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Most chemical reactions in biology require molecules to interact in solution. Nutrients must dissolve. Minerals must dissolve. Hormones must travel through fluids. Waste products must be transported away. Water makes all of this possible. The reason comes back to something we discussed earlier, the polar nature of water molecules. Remember, water has a slightly positive side and a slightly negative side. This allows water molecules to surround and separate charged particles like sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine dropping a spoonful of salt into water. The salt crystal is made of sodium and chloride ions locked together. But when it touches water, the water molecules pull those ions apart and surround them individually. This process is called dissociation. Now those ions can move freely through the liquid, and that exact process happens inside your bloodstream every second. Electrolytes dissolve in water, allowing them to travel through blood and enter cells where they regulate nerve signals, muscle contractions, hydration balance, cellular energy, production. Without water acting as a solvent, those ions would remain locked together and biologically useless. But water doesn't just dissolve electrolytes, it also transports glucose, amino acids, vitamins, hormones, metabolic waste, like urea and carbon dioxide. In fact, nearly every biochemical reaction that produces energy in your cells occurs in an aqueous environment. Your mitochondria, the structures responsible for generating ATP, depend on water-based chemistry. Your blood plasma is roughly 90% water. Your brain tissue is about 75% water. And every cell in your body contains fluid where these reactions take place. This is why even small drops in hydration can affect how your body functions. When water levels decrease, blood becomes slightly thicker, circulation becomes less efficient, nutrient delivery slows, waste removal becomes more difficult. You may notice symptoms like fatigue, headaches, poor concentration, reduced physical performance, all because the solvent environment that supports metabolism is compromised. That's why hydration should never be treated as a minor health habit. It's one of the most fundamental biological requirements for life. If this explanation is helping you see the deeper science behind everyday health, consider subscribing. I share content like this regularly to help you understand how the body works and how small changes can improve energy, metabolism, and longevity. Now let's bring everything together, because when you step back and look at all these strange properties, water expanding when frozen, absorbing massive amounts of heat, forming molecular networks, changing density, possibly existing in two liquid states, and dissolving nearly everything needed for life, you begin to see something remarkable. Water doesn't just support life. In many ways, water makes life possible. So when we step back and look at the bigger picture, something remarkable becomes clear. Water may look ordinary, but from a scientific perspective, it is one of the most extraordinary substances in the universe. Today we explored 6 ways water seems to break the rules of physics. First, water expands when it freezes, allowing ice to float and protecting entire ecosystems from freezing solid. Second, water has an unusually high heat capacity, meaning it can absorb and release large amounts of heat while keeping temperatures stable, a property that stabilizes both Earth's climate and your body temperature. Third, hydrogen bonding allows water molecules to form a dynamic molecular network, giving water its surface tension and enabling it to move through microscopic biological structures. Fourth, water reaches maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius, a strange behavior that allows lakes and oceans to remain stable environments for life during cold seasons. Fifth, research suggests water may behave as if it has 2 liquid structures, constantly shifting between different molecular arrangements. And sixth, water acts as the universal solvent of life, dissolving nutrients, electrolytes, hormones, and metabolic waste, so the chemistry of life can occur. When you put all of these together, you realize something important. Water isn't just a liquid that fills your cells, it's the environment where life's chemistry happens. Your brain function, your metabolism, your cellular energy, your circulation, all depend on the strange and powerful properties of this simple molecule. And that leads to a very practical takeaway. Hydration is not just about avoiding thirst, it's about maintaining the chemical environment your body needs to function efficiently. Even mild dehydration can influence cognitive performance, energy levels, metabolic efficiency, temperature regulation, nutrient transport. So here's a simple challenge for you. Over the next few days, start paying closer attention to something most people overlook: your daily hydration habits. Drink water consistently throughout the day. Support hydration with minerals and whole foods. Notice how your energy, focus, and recovery respond. Sometimes the most powerful health improvements come from the simplest biological foundations, and water is one of those foundations. If this video helped you see everyday science in a completely new way, make sure to like the video and subscribe. I share content like this regularly, breaking down complex science into practical insights you can use to improve your health, energy, and longevity. Because when you truly understand how the body works, you gain the power to take control of your health naturally, and it all starts with understanding the fundamentals. Sometimes, even something as simple as a glass of water